After e4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, we're looking at the move d6. Okay, knight f3, bishop g4. As mentioned already, we pinned the knight as well. So right now we're looking at knight to e7 because earlier we went through a6 attacking the knight immediately, but then we have the whole thing of taking everything, then we take the pawn, all of the forcing moves. Black now might play knight e7 to safeguard the knight, so in case he can take back with the knight and still have control over the crucial e5 square. Now we proceed to immediately attack the bishop. See, this is a very easy game to play. It's very simple, very romantic. So here, of course, bishop h5 is not possible because g4, bishop g6, f5. We're going to look at bishop takes knight. First, let's quickly mention what happens after the very boring and annoying bishop d7 move that they often play when they realize that they also think, I don't want to give up the bishop pair, so let's just go back. White goes on with castling. And now try to understand what's going on, because of course it's not about memorizing moves. What's going on here is that you have a rook on an open file. Well, the file is about to open. You can just take anytime you want or be taken. When you get taken, you're going to have d4. The bishop will be attacking f4 plus the rook. Also, if black takes the pawn and then he plays g5, this is really silly. You'll see why very soon. And black is backwards with development. Another thing is that black cannot castle, right? The only way to castle will be through the fianchetto, but this is terrible and we're going to mention why. Or black will have to castle long side, but let's see. Okay, so let's look at this move. a6, attacking the bishop. We respond with bishop c4, putting pressure over f7. b5 here, let's look at this idea. Okay, bishop to b3. And now, knight to a5, attacking the bishop. This is a recurring pattern. Black wants to do this in order to not only be able to push c5, c4, trying to trap the bishop, but also just remove this very strong bishop. And then calmly go on with the game. This move doesn't work because you're simply just going to take in e5. It's a clean, free pawn. There's just no compensation. And even after taking the bishop, you just ignore it and play knight g5 with a threat of playing knight f7. So you're down a piece. And it looks like now black can also take the rook. Still, white has an advantage after knight f7. Here you are threatening to take the queen. Queen c8, and now we can take the rook. Pay attention to the fact that bishop sacrifice in h3, pawn takes back, queen takes back looks dangerous. Black might try to go for a draw or even win. But that simply doesn't work because of the bishop h3 you have this queen h5 check taking the piece. Although you might argue that knight has an escape in c2 and black might retain the material. So let's look at this slide. Bishop h3, queen check, and now of course king d7 is not possible because you'll be able to take the bishop with check and it's a disaster. King d8 is not possible because rook f8 wins the game. So in this position, black playing g6 is met with the incredible knight to d5. If black takes the queen, knight f6 check. Only move is king to d8 and then knight f7 is checkmate. So in this position, if instead of taking the queen, black takes the knight, then queen to h7 with the threat of playing rook f8 check, king takes, and then queen f7 is checkmate. Position is evaluated +5. There's absolutely nothing for the black player here. If bishop e6, for instance, controlling the square f7, then simply take the knight with an attack on the bishop, and after bishop takes back, still controlling f7, then rook check, taking the bishop, king takes, knight g6 check, only move is king e8 and then checkmate. So let's make a recap. Knight c3, knight c6, f4, d6, knight f3, bishop pinning the knight, we're pinning the opponent knight, and now knight e7. So we attack the bishop immediately, and let's once again look at this variation with bishop d7, we castle, and after a6, bishop c4, b5, bishop b3, what happens after knight d4? Still attempting to remove our very strong bishop in b3. Now here we have a sacrifice. Bishop f7 check. King takes, only move. And now we simply take the pawn in e5, threatening to win the knight for free. And we are going to win that knight for free. Of course, knight takes knight here comes with the development with the queen in f3. The king will have to move. King g8 will result in a mate in f7. Let's look at two options. Black taking the pawn back. This is met by knight taking the knight for free. And after king goes to e8 because of the check, queen h5 check, threatening to win this pawn with an attack on the rook. So after knight to g6, white continues with knight to f5. Position is already completely winning for white. It's a beautiful position to play. The knight is pinned. We're finding material. Black can't castle anymore because he moved the king. There's no counterplay. Bishop c5 with check. You just move the king to h1. Position is evaluated +4 or +5 or something like this. We're threatening knight g7. Queen f6 cannot happen because of d4. And after pawn takes, knight to d5, attacking the queen, threatening also the square c7. By now position is evaluated +6, so you have fun with this. One more thing I forgot to mention from the previous line, knight to a5 attacking the bishop. So we notice that we have to take the free pawn here in e5, and after knight takes we ignore it, we play knight g5, knight takes rook. We're quite down in material, but after knight f7 we're attacking the queen, queen c8, we take the rook. Earlier we went through the sacrifice of the bishop in h3 and mentioned why it doesn't work, but let's see another line. The best move according to the edit by black is bishop to e6. White now continues with d4, and the idea of simply playing queen to h5 and then attack the pawn in h7, obviously. Best move by black is bishop to g8. White continues with queen f3 with a very obvious threat, and after black playing the best move, once again black playing like an engine, which is not going to happen in a real game. Still, you're completely winning. Now white goes on with the move d5. If we were to be able to play e6, then obviously that's game over, which means that black cannot just try to save his knight by playing knight to c2, so the black knight is still trapped, and soon enough we'll be recovering the lost material. Black's best move obviously is pawn takes in e5, and now white plays knight to f7, with the threat of playing the deadly knight e5. So after the only option, which is to take the knight in f7, queen takes back, we have a threat of playing queen e6 immediately, so knight is actually still trapped. The black knight cannot really go to c2 trying to save itself, because then queen to e6 is coming. So let's say for example knight c2, queen check, king e8, queen takes pawn in e5. White is still down a piece, but is threatening to play queen f4 with a deadly threat in f8. And that's unstoppable in a way that this knight cannot really go anywhere, even after going to b4, cannot really go to a6 or c6 or d5 or anywhere. Yeah, it can go to d3, but by then we will have made our moves. Black's best move according to the engine is queen to b7, offering the king the possibility to move along the queen side, but now queen to h5 check. Black's best obviously is king to d7, because pushing g6 allows queen h7 with the threat of going to f7 with a great position. So now the best move is e5, and black's best move is rook e8. White goes on with d6. The idea is to open everything by swapping everything so that the black king is subject to attack. Position is evaluated about +4. If black plays knight to g6, just saving the knight, then rook f7 check, king d8, and bishop g5 comes with a deadly attack. But yeah, you have fun in this position. One last thing I'm going to mention to close this video is, as we mentioned already, knight a5, knight d4 options. Let's look once again at the knight d4 idea. Here we talked about the sacrifice of takes, king takes, and then pawn takes with the threat of taking the knight for free. Now here I mentioned before there were two options. One of them was pawn e5, which we went through. The other one is the best move according to the engine, which is knight to e6. At the moment black is up material, so white goes on with d4, and after black's best move, which is king to g8, how are we going to continue since we are down in material? White goes on with d5, attacking the knight, and after knight to c5 we play e6, attacking the bishop. We're going to recover the lost material, but we have made our king safe and the opponent king very unsafe. Black goes back to e8 to the bishop if he wants to preserve the material, but then we play b4, and after knight to b7, all of these moves are clearly forced, as you can tell. White plays knight to e2 very quietly. The idea is to play knight to g5 and knight to f7. So let's look at black's best responses in this position. h6 obviously, and now knight h4, exploiting the empty squares around the king. Well, not yet, because they are protected. And also here there is not that typical pattern with the queen attack on the knight. So if black takes the pawn with the knight, discovering an attack on the white knight in h4, then you can just take with the queen with the threat of playing e6. You also have queen b6, you're attacking the knight. It's absolutely deadly. Well, e7 would be the best. So in this position, black's best move is king to h7, and now bishop to b2. This is black playing the best, just the top engine moves, and position here is evaluated +2, even though we're down a piece. But if you look at white center, it's amazing. Black's pieces can't move, the king is unsafe, his bishops are looking super silly. We're also stopping potential g5 ideas because we're attacking the rook, and it wouldn't be good for black to take this knight with the pawn, because then white pieces will have an even easier attack on the black king. So after rook to g8, potentially giving the possibility to play g5, the rook is trying to open up, the bishop might develop and black might retain the winning advantage. White plays the stunning, crucial move, rook to f7, with the obvious threat of playing knight to f4 and then queen to d3, discovers attack with e5, the knight jumping. It's gonna be amazing. And let's just mention that bishop takes rook doesn't work because pawn takes, rook to h8, and now queen to d3, threatening a fantastic check in e5 because the king has no access to g8. Look how useless black pieces are. Look how useless this knight in b7 is. This rook, this queen is also useless. Black's best move here is c5. White goes on obviously with e5, and after the g6, white plays e6. Look at this. These three pawns are stronger than a queen, for sure. So after c4 attacking the queen and removing the queen away from this incredible diagonal, white plays queen to c3, threatening checkmate in h8. And this is unstoppable. If instead black doesn't play c4 but rather bishop to g7, obviously looking for swaps since we have a very strong bishop, white plays bishop takes bishop, king takes back, and now knight to f4 very quietly. Obviously we want to go to the square g6, swap everything, and then use our rook to finish the masterpiece. Nothing works here for black. If black plays knight to f5, the idea is to allow the queen the way out, or at least to join the defense of the king. White ignores it and plays knight to g6. Queen f6 to join the defense of the black king clearly doesn't work. You also have a threat of knight h5, forking the two of them, and apparently a mate in 12. So I think we can close the line here. So let's make a recap. e4, e5, knight c3, knight c6, f4, d6, knight f3, bishop g4, and now bishop to b5. What happens after knight to e7? We attack the bishop immediately. And we went through bishop d7 and everything that happens next. So let's look at bishop takes knight. Queen takes back. And now there's three options we're going to briefly mention. One of them, the worst one, will be the worst of the three best. Will be knight g6 with the idea of going to f4, maybe win a pawn or just take the pawn in f4. Giving black some breathing space so he can play bishop e7 and castle. Now here is met by f5. So that was a complete waste of time. Knight going back to e7. Knight will have to go back to e7. Then you can castle. And you have an idea of playing f6. That's just silly. In this position, knight to f4 is met by g3, which traps the knight. And if black plays knight to h4 with an attack on the queen, then queen to f2, attacking the knight, and also threatening g3, trapping it. Bishop to e7, for example, doesn't work. There's nothing here that the black player can do, even, for example, g5 to protect the knight. g3 still traps it. So after bishop to e7, going on with development, g3, and black castling. Of course, we cannot take the knight now because bishop h4 wins a lot of material for black, and we're going to have to resign. Here white simply takes the knight, which is no longer pinned. We can't allow that knight to go to d4 and become very, very annoying. So bishop c6, pawn takes, and now castle. Now yes, we are threatening to take the knight and we are winning material. There's nothing here for black, absolutely nothing. d5, for example, it just doesn't work. Just take the knight for free. Taking the pawn in e4 is just wrong. You take back with the knight. Attacking the knight is just met with knight to e2, and after bishop to h4, it looks like black's game is not completely lost, but now simply queen f3. White is so much better. There's no compensation whatsoever. Even queen check, there's no attacks. King h2, best move. Rook g1 is coming. Positions evaluated. Rightfully that white is up a piece, which it is. In this position we went through knight g6. What happens after a6? Just the whole point of playing the defense knight e7 so that you can take the knight back in c6 and you don't have to smash the pawn structure. You also have a knight that can jump to d4. It's very good. How to continue with this? Okay, bishop a4, keep pinning the knight. b5, bishop d3, same stuff. So knight to d4 now attacks the bishop, the pawn in c2, the queen in f3. This is a super strong knight. What to do? Queen to f2, obviously. Two options now. This knight going to c6, or the knight going to g6, or also knight takes bishop in b3. So if knight goes to c6, then you take the pawn in e5, and now we're threatening checkmate. So black will have to take the bishop in b3. There's nothing else. And knight to e5, knight takes the pawn in e5, protecting f7 doesn't work. You're attacking the knight in d4, so you will win a piece. So now black is forced to take the bishop. Obviously now here you don't need to take back, you can castle with a threat of checkmate, and then you can recapture the knight and open the file for the rook. Let's look at what happens after knight to e5, protecting the pawn in f7. Now here you simply take the knight. You're doing just fine, you're threatening d4, winning the game. So bishop e7, for example, developing, trying to castle desperately, doesn't work because d4 wins a piece. Obviously, you're attacking f7. Here the best move is c5 according to the engine. The reason is that d4 is not effective. But even then, white plays queen to g3, stopping the black player from developing his bishop, and therefore castling g6 will create a weakness that we have widely discussed in previous videos. So after knight, going back to g6, white goes on with queen to d3. The idea is to go to d5, where he's going to put pressure over this c6, very dangerous check, and the f7 square with the obvious checkmate threat. Queen to b8, best move, meaning that after queen to d5 with that threat and the threat of queen check that misplaces the king, or if the black queen were to block with going to d7, you will take the rook, right? So in order to avoid all of that, after queen b8, queen d5, and now queen to a7, protecting the entire rank, protecting the rook, white still plays knight to b5. Fantastic position to play. So in this position we mentioned that c5 was also an attempt of the black player to keep the game going. What happens, and also we mentioned that bishop e7 doesn't work. What happens after queen to d7? d4 you can play it, but the queen is defending f7. So after the knight moves, well, knight to g6 is bad because of h4, threatening h5, winning the game on the spot. So after h5 by black, white plays now knight to d5. White position is so much better. White is threatening to play queen to f5 with all the threats of the world. The game is evaluated as if white was up a piece. Got a rook ready to join the open file, take the pawn. In case of queen swap, if you take the pawn, you'll be attacking the knight, and when the knight moves, you can play knight c7 check, winning material. So that's what we're threatening. If black plays c6, attacking the knight, well, obviously knight b6 wins material. A lot of material, because the queen will not even be able to protect the rook since she will be leaving f7 unguarded. In this position we mentioned knight g6. What happens after knight c6? And now knight to b5, winning material. Pawn cannot take back because then you will take the rook. So after rook to b8, attacking the knight, knight to c3, and now there's an attack on a6, infiltration with the rook. So after a5, stopping that, knight to d5 is glorious. It literally paralyzes the black player. Black cannot develop the bishop through the fianchetto because of knight f6, and there's nothing left to do here. Queen e6 can't play because of knight c7. Queen e7 is not accessible. Queen d8 will leave the square f7 unguarded. Last attempt desperately by black to play bishop e7 and just give up pawn in f7. Well, this doesn't work because after queen takes, king moves, and now queen to g7. It looks like maybe the black player will be able to just play something like e8 here and continue the game, but white is up 3 pawns, and even after the rook goes to e8, white continues with bishop to g5 with a threat of taking the bishop, and then whichever piece takes back, the queen or the rook, you can take back with the knight, you're winning material. If knight takes back in f6, then knight f6 makes a fork to the two major pieces. So after bishop takes bishop, queen takes bishop with check. Of course blocking is pointless because you're winning material. After king to c8, knight to f6, forking the two pieces, the two major pieces, but it looks like queen to e7 might save the situation because you're pinning the knight, but still just play queen f5 check and win material after. Back in this position, earlier we went through the knight going to c6 and offering more support over the knight in d4. What happens after knight to g6? Now here you have a sacrifice. Bishop takes, pawn, king takes in f7, and now pawn takes e5 with check, king moves, and now queen takes knight, and white is already much better. There's nothing happening here for black. After taking the pawn, queen takes, rook takes, white is only up a pawn, but there's no compensation. You play d3, and after bishop to c5, remember black can't castle anymore, but you might play rook f8 to develop. White goes on with a4's best move, with putting double attack over b5. This is thematic. So after b4, knight to d5, the knight is sitting fantastic in that square. We're attacking the square, c7, threatening the check. So pawn to c6 doesn't work because you're still making a fork, you're winning a pawn. Crucial pawn because you're creating a passed pawn. So after bishop to d6, white continues with bishop to g5, attacking the rook. And after rook b8, rook to f1, no need to castle because we can just develop the king. there's no queens on the board. Black might complete development with rook f8, but white is much better. After rook takes, king takes, we're simplifying, we're up a pawn, it's a crucial pawn advantage. And after king to d2, h6 attacking the bishop, you involve the rook in the game, rook f1 check, king moves. Now retreat the bishop to e3, and this is black having played the absolutely best moves available. Even then, positions variated like +2. You're going for a winning endgame. One last mention will be in this position we went through knight e6, knight g6. What happens after the immediate capture of the bishop? Now we take back, we have to, so after knight to c6, it looks like the black player has succeeded in his idea of taking our knight in f3 with his bishop, stopping us from putting pressure on e5, whilst still retaining the c6 knight which he defended with knight e7. So what happens now? Now we play a normal game, castle, and after bishop to e7, finally the black player, playing the absolute best moves of that specific line, managed to find a line where he could castle. So now we take the pawn in e5 though, and now black can't castle immediately. So we're up material, so after knight to e5, protecting the pawn in f7, then d4 simply does everything. So what is the best move here, according to the engine? How does black not lose a pawn? Well, here the best thing to do for the black player is apparently to castle and give up that pawn. Now here we take advantage of that and just take the other pawn. So now we're up a pawn for the rest of the endgame. Bishop takes d6, and now d3 is the best move by white. We're putting pressure on f7 forever. This rook can never really move quietly without losing. This rook doesn't really have access anywhere unless black wants to develop the queen first and then get the rook on an open file. So let's make an example. Queen to d7. White continues the development with the bishop to e3, and after the rook joins the game, still we have an extra pawn that is just a completely free gift. White goes on with the best move being queen to d2. The idea is to take the undefended pawn in a6. So after a5, you can take the pawn in b5, which means that black will have to push this rook back to defend that pawn. So here, after queen d2, black's best move is b4. Well, obviously now we play knight d5. We are still threatening this pawn in a6, solidifying our advantage even more. Black's best move is f5, which makes a lot of sense. And we ignore that actually. We play rook takes a6, and after pawn takes, we're going to be able to recapture the pawn in e4 after swapping in f8. Obviously, now the rook will no longer protect the pawn. And if the bishop wants to take, so the black can keep attacking the e4 square, we actually don't mind and just take the pawn, because rook cannot take in e4 due to knight f6 check, winning a lot of material for the white player. So knight f6 is actually an immediate threat. What is black's best move? It's knight to e5 apparently. Well, that's fair enough because the knight will be defending the queen, so that makes a lot of sense. White's best move is knight to f4. Advantage is like almost +3, so almost up a piece. White is up 2 pawns, there's no compensation whatsoever.